Please join me in welcoming Ronan to the stage.
Good morning. Oh, how are we all doing?
All good.
So far, so good. Right. So this talk is going to be a little bit different than the previous two. First of all, I'm here, which is always a good start. We're going to talk about 4 different topics. Where do I point this thing? Do I point at you or where do, No, go back. Am I doing it or you're doing it? I'm doing it, okay. It's going to be a long morning. For those of you who haven't met me this morning, first of all, a little bit of an introduction. I live in Kuala Lumpur. I'm married to a fantastic Malaysian lady. I've been there about 10 years. Prior to that, I was living in Hong Kong. Some of my colleagues are here in the room today. We worked together over many years. Dermot is with Sir Banner Jurong right now at T5 in Singapore. I work for FTI Consulting out of our Singapore office. So I commute between KL and Singapore on a weekly basis. And if I'm not in Singapore, I'm usually on the road. So I'm chasing work in Perth, in Sydney. Last week I was in New York. So I'm a bit jet lagged today. I came back in from New York on Saturday night and came here yesterday. So if I fall asleep in the middle of my presentation, please come and wake me up and give me another cup of coffee. We've got about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes before lunch. So I'm going to break the talk into 4 chunks. The first, I'm going to speak about what we're seeing as the impact of AI commercially on firms across a wide spectrum. So I'm going to share with you some stories that we're seeing in the legal fraternity, in the accounting fraternity, as a kind of a red flag to what we're going to face in the AEC industry going forward. So the first talk is going to be around what we're seeing as the impact of AI on your fees, on your billable rates, and how you actually structure contracts. At the end of each section, I'm going to take a breather, take some questions, and hopefully get a dialogue started. We have plenty of time this morning. I've got about 60 slides. If I just talk an infinitum, first of all, you're all going to fall asleep, and second of all, it's not going to help any of us learn anything. So at the end of each one, we're going to stop for a quick question and answers, and then we'll move on. Second piece of the presentation is going to be what we see as a technological shift, where we're seeing AI impacting the AEC industry already. So what we see are tools that are being developed, either that are already up and running or near to be up and running, and what that impact's going to have on our day-to-day jobs. I am very experienced in managing BIM teams, but Dermot will tell you I've got no idea how to use the tools. So I know how to manage the people doing it, but don't ask me how certain things work, but I'll give you some ideas. The third part of the presentation is going to be talking about data governance and data security. We are seeing some very concerning trends across Autodesk, Procore, Oracle, and other entities in how they're changing their software agreements, how they're changing their platforms, and how they're ultimately going to change how they charge you for their services. So I'm going to share with you some of the insights that we've got and just raise, again, a couple of questions that you need to be thinking about over the next 18, 24 months. And then I'm going to finish up with some ideas about what you should be looking for as you move forward in your business. What revenue models are coming up, what opportunities are coming up in the AI world, and what those challenges mean for you and your firms. I apologize in advance. I've got a nasty little cough. So if I blow anybody's earbuds out this afternoon or this morning, I apologize in advance. So let's crack on. So the first kind of issue is that we have all grown up, and me in particular over 30 years, running a company or running a business where we'd estimate how many engineering hours required, how many BIM hours required, how much drafting is required. We'd apply rates across all those different pieces, and then we'd come up with a budget for a project. And then we would basically sit down with a client, explain that your airport's going to take this much effort, your school's going to take that much effort. That's a well understood business model, and it's based on a headcount. So if you want to grow the business, you have to hire more people. So if you want to go from 10 million in revenue to 20 million in revenue, you pretty much have to double your organization headcount. That's a traditional business model that is not going to perpetuate in the world of AI. AI is going to create automation for many, many parts of our business. It's going to automate some of the more mundane parts, but it's also going to automate some of the QA control parts. So we have to be paying attention to how we're going to manage this new workforce. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing the innovative companies looking to scale through compute. So looking to use AI agents, AI processes, AI tools to actually automate some of the processes and remove certain people from their organization. That can be technicians, that can be architects, that can be engineers, that can be construction planners. It's coming. I'm not saying it's happening today. Some of this is a future perspective, There's no safe harbor statement, but this is what's coming down the pipeline. So we're going to see automation driving our business. I'm going to go this way. Oh, wait, go back. How have I gone 8 slides in one go? This is out of control. Can I get a mouse? Well, something that works, because that's not working. Technology is great, isn't it? Have you got a mouse that works? Or if I stand here, is that going to be better? No, that's not helping either. Is there no battery or what? It's not me then. You just stand there and click. No. Maybe, is that going to work? This is where I fall off the stage and make a complete idiot of myself. Okay, now we're going. Okay, so where we're going to see some of this challenge is turning your production team and looking at what's happening. So managing your production team. So we're going to see clash resolution automated. There's one company doing it in Singapore already. We're going to see quantification automated. We're going to see drawing production automated. So anybody who's sitting here going, oh, AI is never going to take over my job, some of us are going to have to change what we do in terms of our production. If it can be manually turned into an automatic process, that's where AI is going to start hitting straight away. Now, I'm not talking out of my hat, which I normally do. We're seeing this across some very interesting perspectives in the sector. So other sectors are already facing downward pressure on their fees because clients understand that they've got access to AI tools. So 61% of clients appointing lawyers are pushing down fees on law firms. They're saying that you've got access to agentic tools, you've got access to LLMs, you've got access to RAG. You don't need 1,000 hours to review all my documents. You only need 10 hours because AI is going to do all the heavy lifting. So clients who are familiar with AI are turning around to the law firms and saying, I'm not paying for a junior legal. You can use AI, so I'm going to reduce your fees. KPMG turned around and they were appointing their own auditors, Grant Thornton, and KPMG hammered them for a 14% discount for the same reason. KPMG are using AI tools for auditing their clients' accounts. They know Grant Thornton are using those tools to audit their account, and they said we want a 15% reduction on fees. They started at 25 and negotiated to 14%. This is not me making stories up. This is in the press. This is in the media. So we're going to see this downward pressure on our fees because clients are going to say, I want the value from AI. I want the value from the automation. I want the value from the tools. And this is coming across even in procurement. So people who are procuring simple legal things for drafting of contracts, drafting of NDAs, they also are putting pressure on fees. Now, what the clients are not paying attention to is the investment that your firm needs to put into to actually build those capabilities and those skills. So there's a disconnect. The clients want the free stuff, but they're not willing to acknowledge the investment that goes into it. So you have to balance you have to get a balance between how much training you have to do, how much investment you have to put into these tools, and then how much you have to put into technology to get these savings. But this is what's coming for all of us. Excuse me. A couple of examples. Get my own slides up here. So when it comes to accounting, we're seeing that AI can reduce a lot of the auditing process. So AI can be run across accounts, it can be run on analysis. When it comes to legal, we're seeing the same thing. We can quickly turn around reviews of documents, preparation of documents. And when it comes to even our own firm, we have an internal RAG system where we can actually put in tens and thousands of documents and we can review those documents very, very quickly. So we can figure out where there's conflicts between certain clauses in contracts, we can figure out where there's issues between certain specifications, and we can even find things where there's anomalies in some of the data. So we've been doing some forensic work on some billings and we found patterns where there's fraud using AI tools to analyze the data. Excuse me. And in all these cases, AI is improving the efficiency. So what does this look like? This is our traditional pyramid business structure. We've all grown up running these companies. You try and get to the top as a partner, you've got 10 managers, and you've got a whole bunch of junior staff. If this AI pans out the way we think it's going to pan out, we're going to end up with a diamond. That's me mucking around with the mouse. So you're going to find, if you're at the top of the organization, so there's plenty of gray hair in this room, we're actually safe, we're going to be required at the top of the organization. If you're in the middle of the organization, you're going to have to pivot a little bit and learn some of these tools. But if you're a graduate coming out of university, this is terrifying. There's very, very few opportunities to get into these lower ranks because there's less opportunity. It's 44% year-over-year reduction in hiring because there's a lot of automation in those lower grades. That creates a different problem. If you don't get a start in your career, how are you going to learn the basics? How are you going to learn the ropes? How are you going to then get to that middle management? So we don't think this is actually what's going to happen. It's probably going to look more like a house. It's probably going to look more like this. It's going to be a vertical, and then it's going to pivot at the top. You're still going to need the base. But this is where the pressure is coming. That junior base is where the pressure is coming. So again, that traditional model is actually collapsing, where machines are doing the automation at the base of the pyramid. That highly repetitive, highly automated process. Excuse me. So I'm going to share with you some of these kind of examples later on in the presentation, but this is just some food for thought where the pressure is coming from. So you've got an initial pressure, which is, how do I automate my own business? But if you're an architect, you should be also very concerned, what are my clients able to do themselves that they no longer require me for? And the same with the engineers. So in this next slide, I'm really poking the bear. Now, I've seen this myself. I sat for a cup of coffee with one of my previous clients. He took out his iPad, and he showed me how he developed an entire scheme for a hotel development using AI tools and graphing tools. And it was exactly what you expect from a really good architectural practice. He hadn't engaged any architects. He'd used internal resources, and he produced an entire investment plan for a large-scale commercial development. So this is what's coming again, where the clients can now use the tools. So they can create an assessment of a site. They can do massing, they can do parking, they can work out what the rate's going to be. They can come up with a business case for each piece of land themselves, and they don't need an architect. Right? So you could find yourself getting a phone call from a client going, I've got approval for a zoning plan, I've got approval for an investment, I need you to do the detailed drawings for a 200 apartment development in this site, and here's the layout. I don't want you to change it, I don't need solar studies, I don't need energy studies, I just need the approval drawings to go to the government agent stamped with an architect's signature. Okay, so again, I don't know if you're seeing it, but this is what we're seeing is coming. I'm out of breath. I hate having a cough. So, this is what you're used to. The client will always require knowledge at an institutional level. And that's what you've been good at for many, many years. That data is now available to these engines, these AI agents. And you can put together bids, you can put together studies. But what the clients are doing is they're actually using algorithms, and they're actually assessing multiple sites, multiple opportunities, and they're deciding where they're going to invest their money, what they're going to build, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a hotel, whether it's assisted living. They're making those decisions without the involvement of an architect. So the AI is enabling clients to change the game. Excuse me. So, kind of laboring the same point. This is basically the traditional model. You work out your hours, you work out your rates, and you come up with your fee. We're now seeing clients in this kind of alternative fee arrangement. So people are actually putting in cap fees, fixed lump sum fees. They're still using an hour as a budget, but they're taking a risk and saying, okay, I'm going to deliver this project for this fee. Because if they don't commit to a fixed fee, somebody else will, and they won't win the work. What we're going to see over the next couple of years is more of an outcome-based pricing. So nobody cares how many hours it takes to do the drawings. Nobody cares how many hours it takes to do the engineering. They want an outcome. Does it meet the rental requirements? Does it meet the occupancy? Does it meet the air quality? Does it meet the solar studies? They want an outcome, and you will get paid on that outcome. You will not get paid for how many hours of work you do. You're going to get paid for the quality of the product. So, as we get to the end of this first section, this is me poking the bear. I stood on a podium 25 years ago in Hong Kong and said every QS in the market was going to go out of business because of BIM. Now I'm standing on a podium in Ho Chi Minh saying every consultant's going out of business because of AI. It's not true, but you have to think about it. It's going to have an impact on your business. The question is, what is the impact going to be? There is an expectation that up to 40% of consultancies across multiple sectors will not survive this AI phenomenon because they won't be able to change their business model fast enough, and they will get outmaneuvered by much larger companies or much smaller, nimble companies. But the middle of the market will get crushed. That's the expectation. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what the expectation is. If you can actually industrialize or commercialize your AI assets, That could be your skills, your agents, your staff, your approaches, your IP. You can then actually play this game and compete in this game. But the old hourly model is fading, and this clock is ticking. So that's my first kind of thesis, my first argument. And I'd like to hear from you guys. Am I barking mad, or have you started to see any evidence of this in your actual day-to-day activities in your projects? Who's got it? Who's got an opinion on this issue around pressure of consultants' fees?
Ronan,
Yes, sir.
so can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
So no, really interesting, and I think with downward pressure on fees, I mean we've experienced that in the industry for decades.
Yep.
Thanks. Is that better?
Yep.
Yep. Every time we get more efficient, everyone gets more efficient, and then as you're saying, clients are expecting the fees to be lower. We have to get that. We have to just to stay competitive.
Yep.
So the idea that AI is going to further improve efficiency, yes, that's going to further drive down fees, absolutely. The outcome-based pricing is, really interesting, because that's, I think, we as an industry, we need to be increasing the value of what we do using AI. So do you have any thoughts on what that can actually look like in practice?
Yeah, so I think we're going to see, so again, towards the end of the presentation, you'll see some of these ideas. I think we're going to be moving away from the production of files. So, for example, PDF drawings, spec sheets, models, and we're going to end up becoming more like the custodians of the information for the actual owner. So we have the opportunity as an industry, a bit like what Stuart was sharing earlier on, we can step up and actually have more use to the owners. So being able to address their operational requirements, being able to address how do you build a digital twin correctly and how do you make it effective correctly. The architects and the engineers, in combination with the contractors, have that opportunity to pivot away from churning out effectively flat information and actually building a more robust business model that's got recurring revenue around maintaining assets, maintaining operations. It's an idea, but it needs a lot of thought and a lot of process. But yeah, it's not just about the crush on the fees. It's a case of what other opportunities can we create to actually go and generate new revenues that we haven't already seen.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, the more questions we get, the better, because I'm not going to be able to stand up here for an hour just presenting.
I can the microphone.
I think all you said is quite right, actually, but I do wonder, from the AI outputs, are you going to need AI to check the outputs? So how far does this go? How is the checking process going to work, and also how is it going to be costed?
Okay, so 100% correct that you're going to end up with AI policing itself in some sense. How it's costed is not clear at this point, and in the next section, in a further section, we're going to talk about how the vendors are going to pivot and change how they're going to run this, because the vendors are going to change how we access the AI, they're going to change how we access the tools, and they're going to charge how we do that, and how we then charge our clients is going to be a challenge. In terms of AI checking AI, I think it's early days. I think there's not enough structured data, there's not enough people actually working in the space. And again, I am talking about a future, I'm not talking about today, but the trajectory is quite clear where we're all headed. There are now tools that can check rooms in terms of floor areas against room schedules. There are tools that can check ratings of fire ratings across the models. So you can run machine learning across some of these systems. You can run machine learning and find clashes. There's a tool that we've now seen where you can actually, it will take the clashes from a clash analysis, it will go back to the native models, and it will change the position of ductwork and pipework and cable trays to resolve those clashes automatically. So there is going to be different tool sets built. What I think is going to happen is that we're going to see a complete change in the way we operate as consultants and professionals, because we now have access to really powerful tools. So a simple example, I do a lot of work in Navisworks. It's kind of my bread and butter tool. I've been able to build over the last 6 months plugins for Navisworks that I could only dream of 2, 3, 4 years ago, but I could never afford to build because it was going to take way too much software development time, and I didn't have the ability to do it. I can't write a line of code to save my life. But working with tools like Claude and Gemini and other tools, I've been able to build plugins for Navisworks, and I've been able to solve very specific, very niche problems. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of. Different firms will solve different problems for their business because they now have access to this compute and they've got access to these tools. And they will use AI to actually make themselves more efficient, and then they'll build checking tools and process tools. But I also think because the clients are starting to cotton on to what they can do with these tools, they will start building agents to actually verify and check what's in our models. So when we actually make a submission to a client, don't be shocked when they come back with a whole list of non-conformances, and it'll come back in a matter of hours, not after a week, after some consultant spent weeks and weeks looking at Navisworks. They'll pump the Revit file in, it'll run a check, and it'll send back out a list of issues. So it's coming at us in both ways. We're going to use AI to improve what we're doing, but we're also going to use AI to analyze the models. Keep the questions coming. This is good.
Mine's going to be a bit cheeky.
Good.
Have you asked AI about this?
All these slides were made by AI.
Yeah. So, what is the future of an architecture?
No. So that stuff I don't believe in. So the way I've put this presentation together is I've taken issues I know about in the industry. I've gathered a bunch of information from different sources, and then I've used a tool called Notebook LM. I don't know if you've come across Notebook LM. Notebook LM is kind of a study tool, and I've been able to kind of understand and get into the actual data. So rather than asking ChatGPT some fanciful, give me an idea, which is really good at it, it can create some really wonderful stories. It is hallucinating in some sense or another. With a tool like Notebook LM, which is effectively a RAG, it's an augmented platform, I can get real data out of real studies and real reports. And what you're seeing on the screen today is a digestion of many, many different topics that have been put through Notebook LM, that I've then gone and read up and clarified and made sure these data points are correct. So AI has helped me generate this presentation, but I've used it as a tool, not as a complete source and not as a hallucination. And again, we're going to see owners get this completely wrong. They're going to go to ChatGPT and go, give me the design for a 500-room elderly hair care facility, and it'll just be complete baloney. But there are clients who are going, actually, if I use that tool and this process with this agent on top of my data and what I know about my rental rates, they can actually come up with some really good data. So there's going to be the pros and there's going to be the amateurs. And the question is, how are we going to figure out which ones are actually the pros that we can work with and which ones are the amateurs? We're going to have to say, mate, you've got that completely wrong. This is the actual reality of what's going on.
Ron,
Yes, Stephen.
we tend to follow as society the defence industry in terms of use of technology, over walks of life, including construction, architecture. What's your experience delving into the use of AI in the defence industry?
In short, none. So, apart from what you read in the papers and what I read in the papers about what's going on in the US with Claude and Microsoft and everything else, I have no personal knowledge of how AI has been used in that space. I've heard all kinds of stories, I've heard all kinds of rumors, but I have no first-hand knowledge of what's going on in that space.
Next question tends to lead to robotics and placing people in robotics. How do you see that on the construction side in the next 10 years? You come from living in Hong Kong, where labour forces were quite short and restricted, and they were looking at technology use, certainly in gammon construction, talking about drones and robotics. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a. Again, I haven't invested a lot of time into looking at it in certainly the last 3 to 5 years. I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity, no question about it. But the reality of the world that we live in, and despite everything I'm going to talk about this morning, people still can't even generate a simple drawing with the right dimensions on and that's coordinated with their colleagues in other disciplines. And we have an industry that is still based on the lowest price wins, 99 times out of 100. So when you speak to a contractor like Gammon, like a Mood that I used to work for, like Langer Rourke that Stuart's working with, the biggest stumbling block to get down that road of robotics is you need a really, really good, detailed, engineered solution, and you need to actually involve the automation team in the process of developing that solution to make it actually possible to automate some of those processes. So you end up in this kind of, how do you get the contractor involved early to be able to build the automation, and then what automation can you build? So it's a conundrum, right? So you've got to bring the automation to the design team before you can actually unlock the automation opportunity. What we have seen with robotics is that, particularly in the Chinese market, they've managed to automate a lot of kind of the repetitive manual tasks. So troweling slabs, plastering walls, painting, bricklaying, things that are kind of manual tasks. They've been able to build robotics to automate some of those. But they've not done it the way you and I would think about automation, where just turn the thing on and walk away, have a cup of coffee and come back in 3 hours. They've done it where one manager is operating 3 machines and he's supervising those 3 machines. So he's got 3 laborers working for him, lifting bricks and doing plastering, but it still requires a huge amount of manpower to run these robotic workforces. So I think there's going to be different solutions in different places. But yeah, the Lang & Rourke have got some phenomenal facilities, particularly in the UK, where they've built a lot of prefabrication, there's a lot of automation of those systems. They've invested a huge amount of money. So that's the other issue, is who's going to make those investments if they haven't got the access to it. But I think the automation is not an AI thing. I think the automation is a much more sophisticated machine learning problem than an AI problem. Okay, let's pause the questions because just keep that thought and I'll come back. I'll do the next slide, right? Excuse me. So what are we seeing as technological shifts? What's actually going on? So here's one example. On the left, you've got this traditional deterministic approach to BIM. You come up with a draft, you do some reviews, you do your clash detection, you do your rework, and you solve the problem. And it goes round and around and around. We're now starting to see agents that can be built that can start identifying issues. So you can actually start predicting clashes before you actually build them in. The biggest problem that I've seen in 20 years is that the architects work in one bucket, structural engineers work in another bucket, and all the MEP guys work in different silos. And it's only when you put them all together, you get digital spaghetti. That's not going to change in the short term, because that's the industry that we work in. But these agents can quickly identify some of those problems. There's a company which I've spoken to last week. They've automated the LOD 300 coordination process, so they can start to move around ductwork and they can start to move around pipework, but only inside certain envelopes. So they can't solve major coordination issues. They can't solve issues where the space just doesn't work. It doesn't work it won't work on a T5 because it's too complicated and too ugly, but it will work in a school, it will work in a hospital. Again, depending on the complexity. But those agents, whether it's clash detection, they can also be used to develop agents for things like clash resolution. Checking the semantic model check is basically making sure the rooms are correct, labels are correct, fire ratings are correct, occupancy is correct, and you can make sure you're complying with EIRs for the client. So you don't, again, I'll keep making this point, you can build some of these tools now internally, and you don't need to go to a traditional software development company. So here's one example. It's where you can actually run an audit on a model, and you can actually identify errors in the drafting using AI, and then you can actually get AI to do some of the correction. So you can actually make sure you've got the right areas, you can actually make sure you got the fire ratings correct, you can make sure that the metadata in the model is actually meeting the requirements. Tedious manual work, if you're trying to do it with schedules and trying to go down through schedules, this is where the agents are really powerful. Bamrock is the AI I've been talking about in terms of clash detection. They've claimed they can solve 60 complex clashes in a matter of minutes. I've seen the tool, it does appear to work, but it's limited to kind of scheme design into area detail design. It's not suitable for fabrication, it's not suitable for working on hangars and all the different things you get with an actual construction project, but it's a clear indication of where it's going. The 2 founders of this company are a couple. The husband comes from the architectural world, and the wife is a mathematician who specializes in AI algorithms. So they put those 2 worlds together and generated this business to create these AI tools. So one to watch. I'm certainly not here to promote them, but it is an indication of where it's going. So any of us who've done clash detection, I welcome AI's involvement every day of the week. Now, what I've been speaking about is this idea that we can use these tools to actually improve our lives, improve our productivity. But there is a health warning that comes with this. And anybody who's used these tools will be aware of the idea of a token. So if you go into an LLM or you go into any of these tools, the more you ask it, the more documents you push in, the more information you shove in. At some point, it's going to go, sorry, you've used up all your tokens, your credit card number, please, or else you don't get any more access, right? And that's the world that we're going to live in. Being able to run these computes, being able to run these agents, you're going to have to pay for access to the hyperscale data centers to be able to run these computes. So computation, now this is beyond your normal software license for Revit, your ACC license. Once you start running these agents, if you run them across multiple projects and you start calling in the actual AI compute, you're going to have to start paying for that. Now at the moment it's piecemeal, but those numbers could get quite big quite fast, and it could get quite scary. So you don't have to pay for the manual drafting. So if you think, okay, I'm going to automate all my drawing production, I'm going to use AI, you then have to pay for kilowatts of that intelligence, right? So if you have a large-scale practice, don't think this is going to come free. This is going to come at a very high compute cost. And if you don't know what you're doing, and you leave the AI running in the background, you could rack up some pretty hefty bills. Okay? Now, I've not heard of actual factual stories around this, but we've seen enough models to understand that if you build the wrong model or you build the wrong agent, you can get yourself into all kinds of trouble. I've heard stories about people using AI tools and give it access to a WhatsApp account, and then that AI went off and had 500 conversations with 500 different people automatically on one person's account, and they woke up the next morning to find their phone on fire, right? If you don't know what you're doing, you can create a complete, excuse my French, shitstorm, and you're going to end up burning through a huge amount of money, and you won't get a result. So you have to build these things carefully. So what we're seeing is this notion that you've got in your companies, we've all got these things in our companies where you've got a problem that you would like to fix and you would like to automate or you would like to make it kind of systematic. Up until now, we've had this bottleneck where we don't have access to software developers, we don't have access to some of these tools. But if we can actually unlock some of these things, we get much bigger value. So the idea here is that you can actually now use tokens of compute and you can actually identify particular tasks, particular agents, particular processes that you can improve inside your business. That could be creating door schedules and making sure all the door schedules are correct, making sure all the information is there, and applying a standard to that process, as an example. It could be the rebar in a structural concrete model. We understand the loads, we understand the load pads, we can initially create all the rebar details, and we can use that compute to do that process. Excuse me. Where have I got to? Sorry, I'm running a slide deck in parallel. So, in order to get there, there is a theory that you need effectively 3 skill sets in your firm. Some of these you can hire in, some of these you're going to have to train up. So the first one is basically an orchestrator. So this is basically someone who actually manages your AI solutions. This is someone who's got a very strong background in building agents, building AI tools, understands the technology, understands all the frameworks. You may well need to have a systems builder if you're at a certain scale. So you're going to have to be able to build out all the routing, the context management, and some of the infrastructure. These are very specific skills to the world of AI. The one that is of most interest to all of us is this idea of a domain translator. This is a subject matter expert who's got very specific skills. So you could be an interior design architect, you could be a landscape architect, you could be a hospital architect, you could be a structural engineer that specializes in steel, you could be a chemical engineer, you could be a mechanical engineer. You've got a very specific skill set. You can work with these 2 other groups and you can build specific tools using AI to solve specific problems to your niche. And that's where there's a big opportunity. We all have access to these tools, and I encourage you, if you have not already done so, dabble in things like Gemini, dabble in things like Anti-Gravity, which is Google's platform for actually creating code, and actually see that you can actually build quite robust applications, and you can actually start to solve actual problems. And I've done this myself. So you're basically leveraging an AI infrastructure to build specific tools for your firm. And what that is going to end up doing is the firms that take this on are going to pivot and develop skills that legacy firms don't currently have. So those skills are going to be around how you're going to come up with your headcount, what your actual key talent is. In this case, we'll talk about drafting, your primary deliverables. So currently we're all producing Revits and PDFs, and what your labor arbitrage is. If you can build agentic tools to augment these people, I'm not saying fire them, I'm not saying replace them, I'm saying augment them. You can have basically, in addition to the hours, you can start using compute power and tokens. You can have very, very clear niche SME tools that solve very specific industry problems. And you can end up with these data-driven digital twins. So you can get into the meat of this. And you're combining labor and AI to create an output. Oops. So this goes back to the bottom of the pyramid. If I use AI to reduce 1,000 hours of drafting, and I don't need junior architects, I don't need junior engineers, how do we then mentor the next generation? How do we not end up in a situation in 25 years' time where we're all relying on AI because no one's actually learned how to design buildings, right? We have to be able to train people. We have to be able to bring people along. How do we use AI to support this, not rule us out of the game entirely? And I don't think for 1 minute AI is going to replace any of us. I think we're going to end up with the industry that's going to be a similar scale now, hopefully a bit more productive, hopefully a bit more enabled. We are not going to change as fast as some of these slides would suggest, right? I've been in this industry 25 years. I said 25 years ago BIM was going to replace half the industry. I'm still here 25 years later making the same broad claims, right? The industry that we all operate in is very slow to change, very traditional, very siloed, and AI will struggle to break down some of those silos. But again, I'm just trying to create some food for thought that some of these things may happen in your world. And this slide kind of sums that up quite nicely. The squeeze is going to be in the middle. If you're working in a firm that's 30 to 50 people strong, you're going to come under immense pressure. Because the AECOMs of this world, the ARPs of this world, they have the balance sheet, they have the infrastructure, they have the intellect to build AI at scale and be able to take on much, much bigger commissions. And Ewan's probably going to speak to this later, but the big firms, whether it's Lang O'Rourke or the big consultancies, they will steal a march on the rest of the industry. The ones that are more interesting to me are the solopreneurs, individuals who've got a very niche skill that can build these agentic tools and can offer a very specific service to a client. And they can do that at scale. So you're going to find a situation where the big guys are going to get bigger and the small guys are going to proliferate and the people in the middle will get squeezed, potentially. Again, I'm not buying this 100%, but it's an interesting thought experiment. So you have large enterprises that have got massive tokens and they can build huge platforms. So they can deal with large volumes and produce large projects. You've got small teams that can maintain this very specific domain precision. You could be a specific steel detailer that's an expert in steel connections, and you could use agentic tools to use Tekla, and you could produce shop drawings 10 times faster than the middle management that would do it hour by hour. Those are the kind of examples that you can think of, okay, where's the nimble guy going to come from? Where's the guy going to catch me out if he's going to be doing a nimble? This middle piece of the industry is the one that's under the most threat. And again, I'm not saying this is for fact, this is just an idea, but this is where I think the pressure is going to come. So this is the end of this section. And again, this is a bit of food for thought. Let's skip that one. So what we're saying is that the new model for compute is changing. Organizations that survive will not optimize headcount. They will aggressively restructure operations, your pipelines, and your talent, your people, and use the purchase tokens to improve your outcomes. So using automated clash detection, using automated steel detailing, using automated drawing production, using automated room schedules, you will start to modify how you generate your work. So, who's got some thoughts on that argument? He's back again. Yes, sir.
Just go back to your slide on the middle is going to be squeezed.
Yeah.
That's not a change from where we've been for the last 20 years, I don't think. And I think the reason I say that is if you look at some of the companies and some of the strategies, such as Arcadis, WSP, AECOM, they've adopted that strategy already. They went in and bought to get them to that large scale enterprise.
Yeah.
So I don't think the mindset changes.
I think the speed's going to change.
The speed may change, but I think when you look at WSP, for example, they were quite quick, and Arcadis were very kind to me because I had the shares and they pushed their own share price up, so they were all desperate to do this.
Yep.
I more think about if AI is going to take over, is it not going to be about the skill set than the scale? Because you're going to have to, I think you said that the things have to change in terms of the graduates and what they're doing. Do you not think it's actually going to be the skill set that determines the success rather than the size of the companies that determine the success?
I think it's going to be a combination of skill sets that's going to determine the outcome. So in order for someone to become a niche like problem solver, they're going to need someone who knows how to write and manage AI platforms and manage these token systems. So graduates that come out of university that understand these AI tools, understand these AI platforms, combined with people who understand how architectural practices work, how construction firms work, that's the combination that we have to unlock. I think we can't rely on, like if we wait for the engineering fraternity to figure out how to use Claude to write code, to do rebar detailing, I'll still be here in 25 years' time with even less hair and even less motivation, and we'll still have the same problems. But I think that combination of those skill sets is that bringing those kind of AI-enabled skills into the practice and combining them with those gray hairs can actually solve real problems. But I think this squeeze is going to accelerate. AECOM spent, I can't remember off the top of my head, AECOM spent a chunk of money before Christmas buying a 30-man AI outfit in the UK, not because they wanted the AI skills, because they got slammed by the shareholders for not having AI capability. Yeah. AECOM got out the checkbook and bought AI capability to secure their share price. Right? That's a very skeptical view of why they did it, and the people in the AI team would probably not like what I've just said. But the reality is that the big guys also have a stock market reputation and a stock market expectation. And right now, the stock market will reward anybody who's got AI capability and will penalize anybody who's laggard on the AI space. How effective that acquisition will be, how big an impact it's going to have, to be determined. But again, that skill set being inside an entity as big as AECOM could unlock some really interesting potential. But it's only targeted at scheme design. That tool that they've got doesn't help them with detailing, it doesn't help them with construction. It helps them come up mass scheme design outputs.
Hi, Ronan. The junior talent paradox, I think, is a really interesting quandary. How do you see the successful companies addressing that challenge of getting talent in, to the industry to get started, when the temptation is to use AI to do those, junior, elementary type roles?
So, as an industry as a whole, we don't have enough people to deliver the work that we've got. Like somebody mentioned earlier on that APA are going to build 10 billion Aussie dollars worth of infrastructure in Australia. They haven't got the people to do it, right? We're working with other clients in Australia that have got all these great ambitions, but they haven't got the ability to actually deliver those projects, either from an engineering side or from a project management side, everything else. So anybody who's graduating out of any construction-related industry, whether it's architecture or engineering, they'll all get work, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years. I think where we have to be careful is that we don't over-rely on AI to do those automation processes, and we actually train people up and bring them into the industry. But we can ill afford to sit back and going, AI is going to solve all our problems. It's not, right? So I think we have to keep recruiting, we have to keep getting into the schools, get the kids excited about doing engineering, get into construction. But I think the reality of it is that AI will change how we work, but I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the demand cycle for how many people we need to deliver the amount of work we have to get on with.
Thank you.
Ron,
Yes, sir.
do you think there's a certain amount of policing that needs to be kind of done with AI? Because there's a lot of negative kind of narratives going around in the media and the use and abuse of these systems.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take an example like Grok, when Grok came into the AI space, I'm pretty much don't need a mic normally, but hello?
Oh, there he is, loud and clear.
Here I am, right, you can hear me better now. When Grok came into the marketplace, was it the last year or something like that, it was used and abused like you wouldn't believe. I won't go into detail what happened there, but...
What did you do?
If you Google it, clear your browser history afterwards. But essentially, that was an AI tool that was not policed.
Yep.
And it was used and abused. And
None of them are policed.
a lot of negatives. So is there any kind of effort to try and control what AI is doing?
I think that's a much bigger discussion, and I think that's going to be, like, if you look at what's happened in the US in the last week alone, where Claude has basically stood up to, Anthropic, so to speak, have stood up to the US government,
Right.
and now Microsoft have said we're on Anthropic's side. From what we've seen so far, the industry is trying to self-regulate, and the ones that understand the power of this technology and are fearful of it are saying, look, we need to slow down. But the problem is that the regulators, so whether it's the governments, whether it's the agencies, whether it's the kind of the so-called social police, they're so far behind, they don't even know what's going on. Like, we haven't even seen what's in the current labs, right? So that technology is has got incredible potential to do good, and it's got incredible potential to do harm. Yeah. I'm not here to figure out how we police it. We need to figure out how to make sure we're making use of it, because if all of us in this room walk away going, you know what, AI is not for me, I'm going to ignore it, we're all going to be in the pub in 6, 10 years' time going, geez, those guys doing AI are making it really good. They're making tons of money. They must be doing something right. We have to pay attention, but I have no idea how they're going to get around controlling what some of this stuff comes up with. And I'm not here to talk about LLMs, which are the kind of the really interesting. Where should I go on my honeymoon? Give me 10 options and give me a flight path and blah blah blah. I'm talking about much more compute-oriented agents. How do I automate this? How do I automate that? How do I use this data? How do I use my data to control my outcomes? But I don't have an answer to the social problems that this stuff's going to have.
Yeah. But it's the use of the tool. Sorry, it's the use of the tool in terms of, because obviously it'll be impacting like major elements on the project.
Yeah.
And okay, checking obviously will happen, and there'll be a manual exercise for that. I mean, AI checking AI is probably a bad idea, but there'll still need to be a use for that skill set. But
So
when the tool is used, something that can potentially affect safety on a project,
yeah.
that's got to be covered. Yeah.
So you'll see as we get through the rest of these slides, one of the tools that we have to start building is these internal graph rags that we actually map out how our projects are built, how our data structures are built. The one thing I will say is that AI is not robust enough for anything bigger than a 20 apartment block, right? If someone said to me they're going to use agentic AI to do it something like a T5 or a major hospital or any major infrastructure work, I'd say you're barking mad, right? The tools have proven themselves good at small scale. Cracks start to appear rapidly at large scale. And anybody who's tried to implement AI at scale has found massive problems pretty damn quick, right? So while it's still really interesting and it's in everybody's conversation point, AI is not robust enough to do half of what I'm suggesting it can do today. The question is how quickly it's going to get there. And from what we've seen in the last 12 months, that is an accelerated path that's just going to keep on going. And I had a discussion with a friend of mine who works for Google, and she's seen what's coming in 6 months' time, and she's terrified by what's coming. And she works for the organization, right? So there's a trajectory out there where these tools are going to get more and more powerful, more and more useful, and we're going to have to keep up with that. But right now, I would not suggest using an agentic tool to do all the shop drawings for a major construction project. That's a suicide mission. But I would use an agentic tool to make sure that all the drawings have got the right numbers in the corner and they've got the right revisions in the corner, right? There are certain things you can do effectively today, and there are certain things that are coming down the pike that you need to be aware of. But
So just
yeah.
on that point, I mean, usually you see the finance markets and insurance markets as a proxy for, I guess, being at the leading edge of acceptance of risk and trust. What are you seeing with regards to certainly the insurers as to their appetite to accept AI as that's kind of that edge versus a professional backstop?
I've not come across it to that extent just yet, right? So again, a lot of what I'm presenting this morning is some smart ideas and some smart threats, but we've not seen, for example, people rewrite professional indemnity clauses that write out the use of AI. We've not seen clients write in or write out the use of AI on their projects. And it will come to that. We will start, like going back to Dermot's point, who's going to police this? There is a real possibility that some clients will actually write out, you cannot use AI for these kind of projects. So the simplest example right now is our company has a very clear policy. While we have access to all these tools, if we want to make use of these tools, the first thing we have to do is we have to go to our client, explain to them what the tools do, and get them to sign an agreement that we can actually take their data, put it into our tools, which are behind very secure firewalls, and use that data to actually create analysis reports and the like. And if Ernst & Young and Deloitte keep screwing it up for everybody else by issuing reports that came out of agentic AI, more and more clients are going to come and say, we do not allow you to use AI for the purpose of this X, Y, and Z production, right? So there's going to be that kind of stress between writing it in or writing it out, and signing up for it and signing out of it. But I've not seen the insurers kick up fuss yet. It's only a matter of time, but I've not seen evidence of it yet. But if you're renewing your PI policy, it'd be interesting to see if they put anything in there about the use of LLMs, the use of AI agents, and the impact they may have on your business. But again, it comes down to prudence and good practice. So if you're going to use one of those tools, it's on you to make sure that tool is actually doing what it says it does, and it actually performs the way it's supposed to. And if you issue information that has been generated with AI, it's still your responsibility because you're signing off on those documents, those drawings going out the door. So I think the insurers will probably stand back for now until something goes completely wrong. That's my kind of guess right now. The insurers are always the last ones to figure this out, at least when it comes to construction professional indemnity.
Well, can I ask a question as well? Just going back to the discussion around new generation of architects and engineers coming through. We've been talking to a few universities who approached us to basically have a discussion around how they should teach their students about architecture and the complexity and the risk, which is great. I think that dialogue needs to happen. What do you see at your end from the university side? Where are they going in terms of their curriculum? How are they restructuring the systems, I guess?
I have no idea. I've fallen out of that sphere. I haven't been in a university in quite some time. They've always played catch up to a certain extent, and we as an industry have always been kind of like we don't go back. So I left college in '96 and I've never gone back, right? So I think some of the people in universities will kind of watch what's going on, but unfortunately, like if you look at what's happening, like things like LinkedIn, right, which is brilliant if you want to network. I wouldn't rely on it as kind of an actual barometer of what's happening in industry. But I know from my own feed that a lot of people in university will pick up on some of the articles that I put out there, again, to create conversation and create kind of like, huh, what the hell is he talking about now? And they will take that as gospel and show to the students going, this is what's going to happen, right? Without actually any context or any kind of understanding of it. So the universities they're in a bind because we as an industry don't invest enough time actually go and teach at the universities. Like, it's all great, we have all these conversations about the university needs to do X, Y, and Z. They're only going to do it if we actually commit time and effort to go into the schools and actually explain to the students what's actually going on in the real world. Most people hire graduates, not for what they've learned, but for how they've been wired to think so they can actually be then trained how you actually go forward. So I think if someone said to me, how should we teach AI in an architectural department? I'd say, I haven't got a clue. But you need to pay attention. But I'm not close enough to the universities to know where they're at, but I know for sure they're going to be way behind. That's typically where they're at.
Knowledge share, it needs to be both ways.
Yeah. Now, there is a whole argument about why the hell do we need universities, right? If you have a world where all this information is available online, and you can go into any one of these tools, and if it has access to all of the learned material from all the big universities, why couldn't you use AI to learn how to be an architect, or why couldn't you use AI to be an engineer, right? There's a whole argument about universities are actually on the way out because we don't need that anymore. They can just go and like, it used to be when I was going, it's like, my wife gave me a present 20 years ago. My husband doesn't need Google. I know everything, right? I don't need Google. My wife knows everything, something along those lines. We relied on Google up to a certain point. Now, if you go into any of these search engines, it will actually give you an AI contextualized response. So if you know how to ask questions, if you know how to interrogate things, you can learn any skill you like, right? So what are the universities actually doing, right? In fact, in some cases, they're just baking 17-year-olds and making them into 23, 24-year-olds and getting everybody through that kind of transition, like basically socially. But it doesn't make them better architects, better engineers. They're just a bit more mature and a bit more experienced, and they're trained to ask questions. So I'm not sure how, it's a very long-winded answer to a simple question. I don't know how the university should actually deal with this. It's not a world that I'm familiar with. I couldn't wait to get out of university, so I was like, certainly not in a hurry to go back. Okay, next section. This will be controversial. I'm going to throw some serious stones, and if you've seen some of these stones coming your way, we're going to have a very interesting conversation. If not, watch out, they're coming. I'm going to speak about 3 vendors. These are not intended to be negative in the sense. These are what's actually happening and the impact it's going to have on our business. So we're seeing basically the firms creating walled gardens around your information, right? Autodesk are doing it, Oracle are doing it, Procore are doing it, and I dare say others will follow pretty quickly, okay? So what they're doing is they're creating policies where you're putting your information on their platforms, and then they're going to charge you access to your information. So what does that actually look like? So they're rewriting the service level agreements. Sometimes they're called EULAs or SLAs. They're putting AI policies in, and they're saying, we're going to use your data, we're going to anonymize your data, but we're going to use your data to build AI tools, AI engines. Okay, so you're now paying all these vendors potentially to train their AI engines going forward. Their model is basically take your design, bring it into an AI refinery, pull out what they can in terms of patterns, details, graphs, and then use that to create an AI processing tool. Oops, wrong way. And what they're going to do potentially, and again, this is potential, they could lock you out of some of your own IP. Like, if you're not careful, you could sign yourself up into an environment where you're completely locked into an ecosystem. And to extract yourself is going to get more and more complicated. Any of you who've worked in ACC, who've been asked to move a project from one ACC project to another ACC project, will know how painful that is, right? If you then say, I want to get all my data back, it's going to be even more painful. And they're going to change the way we pay for access to these software tools. So what used to be a software license that you could buy AutoCAD, buy it once and use it for as long as you like, and if you paid an annual maintenance, you could get the latest version of software. That's now become a subscription, and you pay month by month or year by year to have as many licenses as you need. We're rapidly heading to a token system, where to access your model, you pay per token. And the more staff you have using the cloud, the bigger the number of tokens, the bigger your bill is going to be. We're going to get to a dynamic pricing model. The more you use, the more you pay. That's where the vendors want to get to. The vendors have an obligation to their shareholders to increase their revenue, increase their profit margins, and the quickest way to do that is charge you more and more money to do more and more tasks. Okay, and they're going to, by locking you in, you're kind of committed. You have no way out, and the price will start going up and going up and going up. Okay, so we're going to see that trend across the board. I'm going to talk about Autodesk Forma. How many people here know that ACC will be called Forma by the end of this month? Half the room. Okay. I'm going to share with you what I think that means for the industry in the next 24 to 36 months. We're going to be transitioning to direct billing. We're going to have API charges, and we're going to have consumption-based tools. Oracle. Anybody here use Oracle P6 for construction planning? Any contractors in the room? Okay, well, I'll go through that one pretty quick, but I'll explain what's happening. Oracle have a tool called Web Services. If you're a construction planner and you're using their Web Services tool, you can develop really, really powerful construction schedules. And what we're seeing in places like Lang O'Rourke, they will take that data from the construction schedule, they'll put it into a data lake or a data warehouse, and then they'll put a Power BI tool on top of it, and they'll use that to build a reporting tool. And the reporting tool can be put in front of senior management and project management clients. Oracle will tell you that if you're using their web services account, and that data from their web services is pushed through a Power BI dashboard, the person at the other end looking at the Power BI dashboard has to pay for an Oracle P6 license. Even though they're not a planner, even though they're not doing planning, even though they have no idea what the data is. Oracle are trying to lock you in and saying if you want to use your data and share it with other people, they have to pay a license to access the data. Now that's specific to the web services account. These are all examples of where this is going. This is great marketing from Autodesk. This was made up by AI. The future of the built environment is granular, AI native, hyper collaborative. The future is Forma. I made this up, right? But this is what's going on. They're going to tell you it's all great. This is the world we're all going into. We're all going to have a lot of fun. It's all going to be collaborative. But in the back end, we're going to build AI engines off of your data, and we're going to sell them back to you in a couple of years' time. So this is the impression of what Forma is. Again, all of these slides have been generated with a little bit of help from Notebook LM. I'm not that good with graphics. And they're not Autodesk branded material. This is stuff I've just thrown up. But effectively, since by the end of this month, ACC, or BIM 360, whatever the hell you want to call it, will be called Forma. We'll have planning, Forma design, Forma buildings, Forma construction, Forma build, and eventually operations. What they're actually doing is building tools that enable you to actually break down models from a Revit model or a drawing file into data structures. They're trying to restructure our projects into a kind of a data environment. I'm not entirely sure how it works. All I know is where this is potentially headed. You will be able to use their cloud services and be able to do things like wind analysis, lighting analysis, solar studies, but you will have to pay for each one of those computes. So you can have your model on the cloud, you can unlock all their tools, but you're going to start paying for their compute. They will start making those processes quicker, faster, more efficient, but you're going to, again, have to pay access to those tools. So once you get hooked on doing a solar study for your client, once you get hooked on doing a takeoff for your client, then you're going to have to keep paying to access that information. So you still have your desktop, but the cloud's going to be where the engine comes from. And ultimately what they're doing is that Autodesk are still chasing the owners. So we all see Autodesk as a drafting tool. I still think it's basically a jumped up drafting tool. They're trying to get after the owners, right? They're trying to get after this whole digital twin environment. They want to own the digital twin. They want to be able to go to owners and saying, we can manage your hospital, we can manage your facility. They're trying to get to those owners. So what they're trying to do is create this operational day one readiness model. So they create this digital twin that's information rich. And we have to basically figure out, this is the opportunity that I mentioned earlier on. Can we pivot from doing project-based fees to doing facility management services with these models? The question is, if we follow Autodesk down this path, can we leverage this digital twin environment to help the clients? Excuse me. This is what I find scary. From what I understand, the way this Forma platform will work, it will look the same to you. You'll see Revit models on the cloud, but in the back end, Autodesk are going to be basically interrogating all your information, anonymizing it, building graphs, but essentially feeding their AI development tools. And the more projects that people put onto the platform, the more chance Autodesk have got of creating all these tools. And the more effective those tools are going to become. But you end up in this kind of symbiotic arrangement where you want to get access to the latest AI tools from Autodesk, so you have to pay an entrance or a toll to get to those tools. I'm not saying it's 100% correct, the theory, but the clear indication from my perspective is that's what Autodesk want. They want to lock in as many people as possible. They will create AI tools, but then they will charge us for the use of those tools. Okay, quickly on P6. If you understand what P6 is, if you're a contractor, it's your bread and butter, how you plan a project. If you're an owner, you can demand access to those files. You could actually ask for the project files, the P6 schedule files. I work in a company that's got a dispute business, and we have people that can analyze these files, identify critical path, identify issues, identify risks. We can get those files, and we can work on behalf of the contractor or on behalf of the owner. There's a lot of very valuable information in these project schedules. But what Oracle are doing is they're playing this game that if you're paying for 50 licenses, but you're using an API integration that enables hundreds of people potentially to look at the data, they all have to pay for a license. And Oracle have actually done audits and issued letters to clients going, you owe me for 250 licenses, not 50. Because you've opened up web services and given access to more and more people, okay? This is a trend that we're going to see. The software industry is not going to sell us software. They're going to sell us tokens or access to our data. And the more token points, the more access points they can sell, the better their revenues. Skip this one. Okay, last but not least, Procore. Anybody here using Procore? Oh, okay. Half the room, okay. Procore created a storm about a year ago. They first purchased an AI-enabled company, and then they shut down their API to other AI-enabled companies. And they changed the landscape for a bunch of companies that were basically operating in an understanding that Procore had an open API that no longer exists. So Procore have basically done an assessment and said, look, we're all spending way too much time looking for information, like the guys from APA were talking about. Trying to find information is costing us way too much time. So Procore have built this engine called Helix. So the bottom layer is your project information. The middle layer is their AI engine, which is from a data solution. And then the upper layer is their kind of LLM, kind of what's happening with my project, where are all the delays, which subcontractors performing, what's my outturn cost, all these kind of things. In order for Procore to be able to develop these tools, they have to be able to develop them internally, and they have to be able to lock the data in. Procore do not want to be competing against the software ecosystem outside, so they've made it very, very difficult for third-party software companies that have AI capability to access the project data. So a year and a half ago, multiple companies had access to the Procore API, and they could build little tools for site surveying, for safety apps, for all kinds of stuff. And some of them started mining the Procore data for AI engines. Procore have shut the whole thing down. So what's happened is things like trunk tools locked out. So they were able to do documentation, RFI drafting, based on the Procore library of information, no more. Doing daily logs and field reporting in a construction project, they had tools like RackN, gone, locked out. Things like photo analysis, bulk budget updates, there were other tools out there, locked out, gone. Okay, so Procore, by changing their AI policy and their API policy, their programmable interface, they have basically changed the rules of engagement for a whole bunch of third-party vendors. And they have locked their clients' data into an ecosystem inside of a firewall. So this is what used to be going on. People could share access, people could share information, you could get somewhat anonymized information. Now you have to pay to get into it. So if you want to actually get more use out of your data, you have to pay a premium to get through the firewall. Or you have to use more Procore tools. And essentially what they're doing is they're playing this rule of 40. In the software world, the rule of 40 is that if you add up your total revenue and your margin, you should be getting 40% year-on-year growth. And Procore, like Autodesk, like Oracle, have shareholders, they're publicly listed companies, they have to keep growing, and they have to use tactics to keep growing their business. This is their latest tactic, okay? So it might sound like it's great fun, but Procore are playing a game like the rest of them, and they're going to change how we get access to our data. So that's just to set the scene for the last part of my presentation, but essentially we're now working in a world where we have to rethink how we deal with the software companies. We have to rethink how we sign off on these user agreements. And we have to rethink how we're putting our project data into their systems and how we're going to access that data currently and in the future. So this idea of open interoperability is gone. They need to make it difficult to get to the data, They need to make it plausible as put as many people in their ecosystem and not their competitors' ecosystem so they can get the tolls, so they can get that 40% year-on-year growth. Has anybody here seen echoes of this in your world in the last 12 months, whether it's Autodesk, Oracle, Bentley, Procore, or anybody else? Has anybody else started to see a change in the way you're accessing these platforms? Any comment on it?
Yeah, I mean, everything really. I guess Adobe's another, you've got architects, and Adobe's really obvious one. Photoshop just like teasing you with Plano Banana and image-based things, and then it was for free, and then they're starting to explain what they're going to take into it. And then, yeah, you can see it slowly building the layers of subscription, charging.
So there is. I've not looked at the Adobe suite, but yeah, I can imagine.
Well, that's already
100%
happening. We had Adobe in the other day, sort of presenting the kind of mood board type interface. They've now, they're now offering where you can kind of plug in all the different image-based engines together and collaborate, and then you hit your
Token limit.
paywall and you need to.
Please enter your credit card details.
Yeah.
Is there anything you think our industry can do, Roman, to redress that balance? Is there any?
We have to stand up to them.
Yeah.
Because the only way you can get these guys and corral them into a corner is the entire industry has to go, hang on 1 second here, Mr. Autodesk, that's not what we're signing up for. But individual firms, if any individual firm tries to tackle these guys, they'll be given the grin and the smile and go, yeah, we'll look at it. Let's have some lunch, and nothing will happen, right? And some of the bigger companies, like when I was with AECOM years ago, we were already in a token environment. So we had access to entire suites of software. We were paying millions of dollars a year in software license fees, but we could pull down whatever tool we wanted, right? And that got shed across the entire business. Some of the big animals are already in that environment.
Yeah.
Again, but for the people that are running smaller, mid-sized companies, this is a bit of an alarm bell in terms of where this could potentially go. I'm not saying there's any malice in what Autodesk are doing, but I do see a risk to businesses that are using their services as to where this can end up. And I can see it creating additional cost. Now, the way we all operate, that cost eventually gets passed to the owners, but I think that's a kind of a different conversation.
Three-way question. First to Sakamoto-san. With Takanaka in Japan, are you generally still using non-Autodesk software?
Yeah.
Are you still using ArchiCAD?
Yeah, ArchiCAD.
And Tekla?
In Osaka, ArchiCAD, but in Tokyo, so also.
Mix?
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, Takanaka, I think maybe 10 years ago, moved away from Autodesk and moved to more independent softwares like ArchiCAD, Tekla, and for MEP, Repro.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a massive construction company, $15 billion turnover. So you guys did it, and your projects are still brilliant, and you're still designing and building projects in non-Autodesk software. So
Yeah, there's plenty of options out there.
I think one thing we've seen in Hong Kong is the government's pushing Chinese software.
Mm-hmm.
So that over the next year or so, they're mandating the use of diversified software.
Right.
And so it'll be more the YGK, PKPM, hold on. They'll see more in Hong Kong, and I guess that's how they're trying to address it from a government mandate perspective, rather than from.
That's one angle.
Yeah, I mean, it's still Bank of Hong Kong, which it does, but
Yeah.
we're now having to, completely change our workflows to fit. Actually, we're working with those companies to say, okay, this is what your software's like. This is the workflow we use. Can you change your software for it? So, yeah, we'll have to do that.
Yeah.
They want to get to market as well. They want to challenge all of this.
Yeah, and Glodon are a great example. I had a meeting with Glodon 2 years ago, and the conversation was, we want to dominate the world. Like, it's not that we want to sell software in Hong Kong. Glodon want to go and actually take Autodesk on toe-to-toe, face-to-face. But they need to get a few more things sorted out before they take on the behemoths. But they're not afraid of taking them on.
who's that, sorry, Ronan?
Glodon. So if anybody work in the QS space, outside of China, Glodon has got a solution for doing quantity takeoff that is model based, and they have an outfit in Singapore, they have an outfit in Malaysia, they've got an outfit in the UK, and they've been selling that quantification tool that they've got, and it's proven quite successful. But when you actually see what Glodon are doing domestically, all the stuff that Stuart showed earlier on about the 3D modeling and the 4D sequencing and the 5D takeoff and all that kind of stuff, Glodon do all that in their suite of software in China. They just haven't jumped the fence and gone global. Yeah. Right. So what they've exported is their QS tools. What they've kept in China is they have an entire BIM suite that covers from design all the way through to operations. They've even got complete facility management opportunities, right? They've got some really, really good technology. They just have been keeping it inside of China to polish it, refine it. And I'm sure the vendors in Hong Kong, the resellers, have got to play on what's going on with the Glowdon stuff. I know some of the guys, but yeah, they will sooner or later start competing with Autodesk. But
the electric car equivalent in software too, or BYD, and
you have to imagine so. There's a reason the Americans have banned the sale of BYD cars in America. They don't want the competition. They can't ban the sale of software, or they can try.
I guess the other part of that is the data sovereignty, data residency kind of question.
Yeah.
It hasn't really come up in any of our conversations yet. I guess the data center in Australia or Australasia is part of the solution around the data sovereignty piece.
Yep.
But ultimately, if the US continue with certain political, a direction, that will certainly come into the conversation around where ultimately data sits, certainly as it relates to workers.
Not just Autodesk, across the board, right? So it's not just going to be specific to Autodesk. So a lot of the technology that we use in our day-to-day, whether, like someone mentioned Revisto, you've got things like OpenSpace, all these other solutions. They're very often sitting on an Azure stand-up, an Amazon Web Services stand-up. They're working on a large-scale American technology suites, and they're not designed to be set up in a project server. They're designed to be set up on a cloud-based solution. So, yeah, if the current phenomenon continues and enough people get their nose out of joint, you will start to see the proliferation of more localized data center operations. There's also an argument for you should be building your own data lakes internally. Now, whether you can host them on a domestic cloud provider, because there's no point trying to build a server in your office, but you should be able to lock that into an Australian kind of data center where you can put all your project data, all your client data, and have that secure, and not be relying on an Autodesk, not be relying on other parties. And there's the last couple of slides going to touch on that. Actually building your own RAG, building your own LLM tools on top of your own data, and starting to learn how those skills, and not being reliant on big American or big Chinese entities to actually manage your data and manage your business. So with that, we'll just jump into the last section. Again, thank you for all the questions. I hope you're finding some of this useful. I'm kind of throwing a whole bunch of stuff at you, but I'm going to leave you with some ideas about potential revenue models. Again, these are ideas. Don't ask me to put down my name and sign and going, you must change your business to this model, but these are things you should be at least considering or at least experimenting with. So before I get to the business model, again, there's a couple of words of warning. We are going to see more and more legal cases around digital deliverables. And we've started to see it in my world in the last 12 months. I've been called up personally on 3 different cases where there's a dispute between the engineer and the contractor, or between the contractor and the owner. And the dispute is around project delay, project cost issues, but the digital delivery is a key component of the dispute. And they're asking for professional advice about how was the EIR written, how was the contractor's team formed, what was the quality of the digital deliverables, why was the Revit model not up to spec, all of these things. There are going to be more and more of us dragged into disputes in this world, in this digital engineering world. The clients are getting more sophisticated. They understand the value of these digital twins, and they also understand when they're being given bad quality information, and they're going to start calling people to task. So whether you like it or not, over the next 12 to 18 months, 24 months, you will start to hear more case studies of law taking effect on digital engineering deliverables. We're seeing in the UK, we're seeing in Australia, and we're going to start seeing some of it more local in terms of Asia. So the next couple of slides talks about some of those examples, but basically the design teams currently, I'm not sure if they lack the incentive or they lack the fee, but they need to start producing FM-ready data, right? So we all have these understandings of what ISO 19650 is about. We all understand what our obligations should be. We all play the game that it's actually the contractor's responsibility, not our responsibility if we're on the design side. But we've all got to start playing this game that we have a legal responsibility over and above our contractual responsibility, and some owners are going to call us to task if we don't deliver against those deliverables. The failure to meet digital fitness for purpose is a breach of warranty. And there are some example cases where clients have been found out for not actually writing the right requirements, and construction firms have been found out for not actually delivering the right data. So there are going to be cases where we're doing that. That graphic's gone completely wrong. So the delivery of a physical asset is no longer the sole measure of project success. We are building 2 assets. We're building the physical asset and we're building the digital asset. And clients are starting to put more and more value into those digital assets, whether it's an operational model for APA, whether it's a hospital operational model, whether it's an airport operational model. the digital twins will become more and more fundamental to how they run SCADA, how they run IoT, how they run facility operations, and how they actually do future renovations. So we have to get these deliverables right, and if we don't get them right, we could find ourselves in legal jeopardy. One of the disputes, and some of you will probably be aware of it, is the Mott MacDonald dispute around the access to the CDE and how that played out. We're going to see more of that. So clients are not getting it right, and consultants are not getting it right, and contractors are not getting it right. So there are different CDEs for different purposes. You have three options.
Right, what was that? Briefly, what was that about?
So Mott MacDonald and the contractor got into a dispute. Mott MacDonald were providing access to the CDE. In the dispute, they turned off the access for the contractor to the CDE, so the contractor lost access to project information records, project logs, and then there was a big hoo-ha, and it was found that it was incorrect the way it was done, but it went to the courts, ended up in the High Court. Now, I'll have to get you the actual complete case, but there was a dispute in the UK around who had access to the CDE and who controlled access to the CDE and what the impact was on the project. So I'm not suggesting that any one of these is better, but there are three options. So if you can get an employer that's big enough, they ideally should be holding their information in their CDE. So where this has been very successful is in major railway projects, major airport projects. They have much bigger capital budgets. They have much more sophisticated teams. They can build the infrastructure to support that, and then that works. And the design team can then provide all the information required to the owner into their common data environment. What tends to happen is that the consultants who come in first are tasked with building the common data environment for the project. So whether it's an engineering firm, an architectural firm, they're set the project up, but those firms don't see the project all the way through to the end. So then how do you manage the CDE from that into the construction? And then you have this other idea where you have your work in progress files on your CDE, and then you share your published information into the client CDE. And that's a more ideal way of doing it. And that's what we're seeing is working in the UK market. So you have clients who've got a lighter CDE, so they're not using the client CDE for the entire work in progress, review, approve, submit process. The client CDE is only accepting published information as a record, but the design team are actually using their CDE to go through all the gates, all the approvals, all the reviews, all the comments, and then when it's approved, it gets pushed into the client CDE. So this lower one is actually a better solution, but that means that you've got two different platforms administered by two different teams, and you've got to make sure they actually connect together. So it is a bit of a minefield. There's two cases here. So this is the, I can't even pronounce that, I think it's Hogart. So there was an absolute warranty case, and I'll get you these, and then there's global switch against Arup. In this case, the compliance with the industry standards is insufficient if the end result fails its contractual purpose. So this was a warranty issue. And this one was quite interesting. This is where the courts found in favor of Arup, and they say that they will not imply a fit for purpose if the owner failed to specify what purpose and what standards. So there was too vague a request by the owner, in this case Global Switch. So there was no actual legal protection because the consultants didn't know what the hell the owner wanted, right? So if the client hasn't actually specified a robust information requirement, they can't then turn around and actually throw the book at the consultants and say, you didn't give me what I wanted because you didn't actually say what you wanted. So there's a couple of steps. In order to avoid this liability, this is just good practice, right? There's no rocket science here. Make sure that the asset information requirements are actually set for fit for purpose, right? So a bit like Stuart was talking about this kind of the digital process that they run in Lang & Rourke. At gate one, at the actual RFP stage, make sure this is actually defined, right? Don't wait for the job to be half finished, and then the client suddenly wakes up and going, oh, I need an asset information register or requirement. Figure out who's going to control the CDE. Who's going to host it? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to have access to it? Whether there's multiples or whether there's individuals. Get that sorted out in terms of information management. Make sure that you're following the same standards. So whether it's the Lang & Rourke DMS, whether it's ISO 19650, whether it's a client's existing standards, make sure they're set up and adhered to. And then make sure that all the metadata structures are complying with the actual requirement of that, especially in the UK, that golden thread. So you have to get these basics right. What does the client want? How are we going to control the information? What standard are we following? And how do we make sure we deliver what's required? If you do this, you have less jeopardy when it comes to disputes. Skip this one. So, excuse me. Last piece of thought-provoking. There is an argument that we should build our own data lakes. And I don't believe this is true for every size business, but I think some of us are going to have to start thinking about how we build these systems. So the technology exists for us to actually start building out a data structure. So we can actually start looking at our historical data. And we can actually use our information inside of our firewalls on technology to create basically our own information without relying on third-party vendors. So you can take a whole bunch of existing information in your business, whether that's specifications, previous sets of drawings that have been stamped and approved, Revit models, Excel sheets, whatever it is you've got as your raw material. You can put that through a process and you can start to generate kind of a lake of information of how you've run your business. So you can basically take the file-centric bottleneck and move into basically centralized data. And this will establish a single source of truth for your business. Excuse me 1 second. I don't recommend getting a cough. So when it comes to Revit, it actually is based on this graph RAG idea. So you can take the structure like an IFC file, and you can actually break that down into actual bits of information or bits of data that you can then build AI agents to actually go and make use of. So you can take your model information, your design information, your IP, if you like, and you can build your own kind of AI tool internally. So one example of this is where, one example of this is where you take how you've done submissions for certain types of projects in the past. So you can take all of your previous submissions, you can build a library of that information, and then the next time a client requests an RFP, you could automate a large percentage of that process. So instead of having to manually repeat all these things, you actually take all of the forms you submitted before, CVs, case studies, project examples, you build your library, and then depending on the type of project, it will pull in whatever information you want, and you can speed up your submission when it comes to actually making submissions. So in this case, we're talking about a US example. You can automate your RFP response process. So instead of manually having people going, where's Ronan's CV? Is Ronan's CV up to date? Does Ronan's CV have aviation in it? You can actually use all these libraries to actually speed up that process. So in order to create that system, there are 3 recommendations. So again, make sure that your relationship with the vendors is clear. So if the vendors are starting to write in AI requirements, then get yourself sorted out. Make sure that your information is secure. Set up firewalls so you can contractually limit the vendors from actually getting access to your information. And make sure you've got secure rights. So require strict monitoring obligations and audit logs to verify that internal data has not influenced external vendor training projects. That is much more difficult to do than it is to say. How do you stop Autodesk taking your way of designing hospitals and putting it into their engines? Right? How do you stop Autodesk taking your airport designs and putting it into their AI engines for other people to design airports? And how do you have the ability to audit what they've done with your data? We've heard all kinds of stories about authors claiming that their books have been ripped off by ChatGPT and then trying to create a court case to say you can't use my copyright information, and it all gets kind of brushed away. We're a small industry, or relatively speaking. How are we going to take on these big behemoths going, you cannot take my design ideas and apply that and put that in your engine so other people can then use them as reference, right? It's a really interesting challenge. And I don't know how to do it. I'm just saying we should actually be considering that problem. So this is the last slide. Being able to build your intelligence, your sovereign intelligence model is going to be your defense, and it's going to be your opportunity to monetize your intellectual property. And again, this is just food for thought. If you can actually build your own lakehouse or your own data lake internally, and you can build your own LLM on top of that, that you can respond to clients, you can respond to audits, you can respond to requests from clients, you have an advantage over other people that haven't gone down that track. Now, this is not for everybody. I don't recommend everybody goes out and build a data lake, right? But the bigger firms are already doing it, some of them, and some of them are starting to figure out how we do it. But if you want to protect yourself from domination by Autodesk or Adobe or anybody else, can you build your own data lake house in your business? So that's it. They're the 4 topics I wanted to cover today, and happy to take a couple more questions before we go for lunch, but I don't want to stop people getting their lunch either.
Ronan, a brilliant presentation after an 18-hour flight with the cold. If there was one theme or comment that you'd want to kind of leave with the room, Is there one thing you can put your finger on that you would say this is probably the most important thing right now? Or
So in my experience over I've been playing with these things for the last 24 months. First thing is go and experiment beyond a ChatGPT LLM. So go and look at what you can do with these tools and figure out, okay, what agent can I build for doing a drawing review? What agent can I build for coming up with an RFP? What are other people doing? And have a dabble in like any of these AI tools, whether it's Claude tools, whether it's some of these other tools. If you're not playing with these things, you're not going to actually figure out what's going on. And when you figure out one of them, don't fall for the trap that you've got it figured out, because 6 months down the road, the whole game has changed. They're changing and developing so fast that if you think that what you know in ChatGPT is it, you're already behind the times. So I think it's one of those things where find an hour in the week and go and have a play, right? And if you go and dabble in these things, and you don't even have to use the tools. There's plenty of stuff going out on social media, whether it's YouTube or all these places going, how do I build that tool? Or how do I build that plugin? Or how do I solve that problem? Being aware of what's going on in that space is going to educate boardroom discussions, design team discussions, going, oh, I wonder if there's an AI tool I can use to solve that problem, right? So just being aware of what's out there, whether it's Anthropic, whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft, they're all out there developing these tools. Just go and see what's actually happening and what can you do with these tools. Yes, sir.
I think one of the, I guess, the tensions that we're seeing play out is the difference in timescales between a physical project happening and I guess, the rate of technological change.
Yeah.
And how we kind of resolve that tension or at least manage it is something we really struggle with.
Yeah. And so data centers are a world that I operate in quite a lot at the moment. We're building data centers that are already out of date. Right, so there's data center designs that have gone to the market for contractors to stand up, and people are trying to figure out how they refit them to suit the new cooling systems, the new chip systems. So I don't have an answer to that question, but we are working in a world that seems to be changing more rapidly than anything we've seen in the last 20 years. But at the end of the day, we still have to build these facilities, we still have to build the schools, we still have to build the hospitals. And it's still going to take people on drawing boards, on CAD workstations, on Revit. It's still going to take teams of people in Atlas to help us get these projects delivered. There's no quick way to build a building, right? There are smart ways to build buildings, but I don't think there's a quicker way to build buildings. And I think AI is going to help us with productivity issues. I don't see AI as a threat. I see it as a massive opportunity. And I think if we can figure out how to use some of these agents, how to use some of these machine learning tools, we can get past some of the grind of having to go through drawings and revision stamps and all that kind of nonsense. And we can actually get down to solving real problems, whether it's how do I redesign that floor plate for that data center, rather than how do I get approval from X, Y, and Z organization for this rubber stamp, right? So I think we have to be smart with these things, but I think we have to pay attention. I don't think they're not going to go away. This stuff's not going away. Like, we all know how many data centers are going to get built in the next 10 to 12 years. We know how much energy is going to get built to run them. Anybody who thinks that this is a passing fad, they're kidding themselves. This is the technology we're going to live with for the rest of our days. The question is how we make efficient use out of it. I don't think any of us are going to be out of work. I think we're going to be doing different jobs, but I don't think we're going to be out of work. Yes, David.
What is the role of a team in all this? Do you think it's a real alternative to the big vendors that you mentioned before?
It's going to be it's that same constant battle. The vendors have got unlimited resource in terms of financial power and influence, and OpenBIM is a bunch of really well-minded people that have got some great ideas. But quite simple, I went to the event in Singapore last year around OpenBIM, and it's some fascinating people, but it's a bunch of boffins who are living in an alternative universe. They're not living a commercial reality, right? And that's the pure and simple of it. If I said to Dermot over there that he's got to use IFC4 for all the coordination on Changi T5, he'd probably take me up at the top of the roof and throw me off. Right? So OpenBIM as a concept is a great idea, but the reality is you've got a bunch of well-minded people with limited resources competing against behemoths.
Yes, the alternative to that is, if you take Zuru, for example, where they've developed their own software for their own integrated, cradle-to-grave process.
Yeah.
And it's set up specifically for a typology, but it's, it contained software approach or more holistic build approach.
Does it work? I'm not familiar with it, so.
I think we'll wait and see with the experiment. Well funded, but
yeah.
not
standard.
Yeah. Well, the other one is the NVIDIA have got this Omniverse, right? And I'm like, what the hell? So I went looking at it. I hadn't heard of it until 2 months ago. And Omniverse is basically a complete digital environment. And the reason I came across it was one of the consultants I was speaking to, that design data centers, they were using this tool to design robotic processes to be able to hot swap drives out of data centers, because the temperature in the data center is going to go through the roof. The noise in the data center is going to go through the roof. It's going to be impossible for a normal human being to go in and actually do any work inside the data halls. So they're having to create basically robots. They're looking at using Elon Musk's mannequins, for want of a better description, and how can they program the actual operation, and then how can they design the building to facilitate the operation of those kind of robots. And they're doing all that inside the Omniverse, which, when you look at it, all sounds great, but then you realize you've got to pay NVIDIA a chunk of money to get the actual hardware and the software to actually build this virtual environment, right? So again, if you have a big enough checkbook, you can come up with these great ideas, but it's going to be very niche. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see more and more niche solutions and more niche workflows. I think the day of the generalist is gone. I think we're going to find ourselves getting niched in tighter and tighter and tighter, and we're going to have very specific skill sets in very specific sectors. And if you're good at doing data centers, you're not going to get a phone call to go and do elderly living. And if you're good at doing elderly living, you're not going to get a phone call to go and do an airport. You're going to end up in these very niche cycles. Okay, I said enough. I'm here for the whole week, so you can come and chat to me at any point. Thank you all very much for the opportunity, and thank you to David for organizing.